The cantina on Kepler Station was dark and smoky. Strange creatures from across the galaxy sat at metal tables, drinking and talking in low voices. Blue lights flickered overhead, casting weird shadows on the walls. The air smelled like oil, sweat, and a dozen different alien foods. In the corner sat Commander Zexthera. He was old, even by his people's standards. His green scaly skin was covered in scars from 1,000 battles. Half his face was metal now, with glowing red sensors where his left eye used to be. Forearms moved as he talked, each one telling part of his story. "Listen to me, you young fools," Zexthera said to the crowd around his table. His voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "I've seen wars that would make your nightmares seem like pleasant dreams. I have watched entire star systems burn. I've seen weapons that could crack planets in half." A young Rigelian with purple tentacles leaned forward. "Tell us about the Hive Wars again, Commander. The part where you held the line at Proxima." Seven Zexthera laughed, but there was no joy in it. The Hive Wars. Yes, that was something. 10 million bug ships, coming out of dark space like a storm of death. We had the biggest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. 2,000 battleships, each one the size of a small moon. He took a long drink from his bottle. The liquid inside glowed, blue, and made steam when it touched his lips. The bugs had acid that could eat through our best armor in seconds. They had queens that could control 1,000,000 warriors with just a thought. When they screamed, the sound could drive you mad from 3 star systems away. An old trader with 6 legs nodded. "I remember the reports. Whole colonies just ... gone. Nothing left but empty worlds." "Empty worlds and bones," Zexthera agreed. "The bugs did not take prisoners. They ate everything. Plants, animals, people, even the dirt if they were hungry enough. I saw them strip a world bare in 2 days. 2 days, and a planet that had been green and full of life looked like a dead rock floating in space." He gestured with his upper right arm. "But we stopped them. It took 5 years and cost us half the fleet, but we stopped them." The final battle was over the Centauri system. I was there, commanding the left wing. Threw everything we had at their queen ship. Nuclear missiles, plasma cannons, gravity bombs that could twist space itself. The crowd was quiet now. Even the bartender, a big furry creature with too many eyes, had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. "When it was over," Zexthera continued, "we had one. But the cost ... We lost 2 million good soldiers that day. The queen ship was the size of a small planet, and it took 17 gravity bombs to crack it open. Explosion lit up half the galaxy." A small blue alien raised her hand. "What about the Crystal Empire? You fought in those wars too, right?" Zexthera's metal, I glowed brighter. "The Crystal Wars?" Now that was something different. The crystals were not like the bugs. They were smart, maybe smarter than any of us. They could think with their whole planet. Every crystal on their world was like one brain cell in a mind the size of a moon. He moved his lower arms, shaping something in the air. They had ships that were alive. It's not just machines with computers, but actually alive. Ships that could heal themselves, that could learn and grow and change. I saw one of their cruisers get hit by our biggest gun. A shot went right through. It left a hole you could fly a fighter through. But the ship just ... fixed itself. In minutes, it was like nothing had happened. "How did you beat something like that?" asked the purple Rigelian. "Time," Zexthera said simply. "We could not outthink them, could not outfight them, but we could outweight them. Crystals think slow, you see. It's very slow. What takes us a second to decide takes them an hour. So we hit them fast, over and over, never giving them time to think." He drank again, longer this time. "Even so, it took 30 years. 30 years of the fastest, most brutal fighting the galaxy had ever seen. We lost entire fleets in battles that lasted only minutes. But in the end, speed beat intelligence." The cantina door opened with a soft hiss. A human walked in, looking around the room with curious eyes. He was young, maybe 30 in Earth years, with brown hair and a friendly face. He wore the simple blue uniform of a Terran merchant ship. The human walked to the bar and ordered a drink. His voice was quiet and polite. "Excuse me, could I get whatever you have that won't kill a human?" The bartender laughed, a sound like wind through rocks. "Human, eh? We don't see many of your kind out here. Most aliens are still afraid of you people." The human looked surprised. "Afraid? Of us? Why would anyone be afraid of humans?" Thara had gone very quiet. His 4 eyes were all focused on the human now. The crowd around his table noticed the change and turned to look as well. "What is it, Commander?" asked the blue alien. "You look like you have seen a ghost." Zexthera stood up slowly. His metal parts whirred and clicked as he moved. "Young human," he called out. "What is your name?" The human turned around. "Drink in hand?" "Jake Collins, sir. I run cargo between the outer colonies and the core worlds. Nothing too exciting." Jake Collins, Zexthara, repeated the name like he was tasting something strange. "Tell me, Jake Collins, what do you know about the battle at New Haven, about a year and a half ago?" Jake's face got serious. "New Haven, that was my home colony, sir. Terrible business, that. The Screeth came out of nowhere with a huge fleet. Thought they were going to wipe us out for sure." The cantina had gone completely quiet now. Even the music from the back room had stopped. Everyone was listening. Zexthera walked over to Jake. Moving carefully on his 6 legs, "I was there, human. I watched the whole thing from a council observation ship. I saw your people face odds that should have been impossible to beat." Jake smiled, but there was sadness in it. "We lost good people that day, sir. Captain Parker, Commander Hayes, a lot of others. But we stopped them, didn't we? Sent those Screeth running with their tails between their legs." "Stopped them," Zexthera repeated. "Yes, you stopped them. But how you stopped them? ... Double." He shook his big head. "In all my years of war, in all the battles I have fought, I have never seen anything like what you humans did that day." He turned back to his table, but his voice was loud enough for the whole cantina to hear. "You want to know about terrible weapons? About the most frightening thing I have ever seen on a battlefield? Sit down, all of you. Let me tell you about the day I learned that humans do not need weapons." Jake looked confused. "Sir, I think you might be giving us too much credit. We just did what we had to do." Zexthera laughed, but this time there was something like fear in the sound. "What you had to do?" "Yes, that is exactly the problem. You see, my friends," he said to the crowd, "I have seen weapons that could destroy stars. I have fought against machines that could think faster than light. I have faced enemies that could reshape reality itself." He picked up his bottle and held it up to the light. "But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day I watched a human colony turn everything they had into instruments of war. Kitchen knives became armor-piercing weapons. Children's toys became communication jammers. Medical equipment became electronic warfare tools." The old warrior looked directly at Jake. "Your people do not just build weapons, human. It become them. Every single one of you is a weapon waiting to be activated. And that, my friends, is the most terrifying thing I have ever encountered in 1,000 years of warfare." Jake took a sip of his drink and smiled. "Sir, if you think that was scary, wait until you hear what we had planned if that first attack had not worked." Zexthara set down his bottle and looked around the cantina. Every alien in the room was watching him now. Jake Collins stood near the bar, his drink forgotten in his hand. The old warrior's metal eye glowed as he remembered that terrible day. "It started so well," Zexthera began. "The Galactic Council had been watching your species for months. We knew humans had developed faster than light travel. We knew you had spread to several star systems. It was time for first contact." He moved 2 of his arms, drawing shapes in the air. "The Council chose New Haven because it seemed peaceful. Farming colony with maybe 2 million people. Green fields, small cities, nothing that looked like a military threat. Perfect for a friendly first meeting." Jake nodded. "Remember that day? I was working the cargo docks when the Council ships arrived. Biggest things I had ever seen, like floating cities in the sky. 3 ships, Zexthera continued. The Council flagship Harmony, my observation vessel, and a diplomatic transport. We came in peace, broadcasting friendship messages in every language we knew. Your people responded quickly. It's very organized, very professional. The old warrior's voice grew softer. Captain Lisa Parker led your delegation, a tall woman with gray hair and smart eyes. She spoke for your colony government. Admiral Kyle Morrison commanded your defense fleet. Only 14 ships, but they kept good formations. A small green alien at a nearby table asked, "What were the humans like when you first met them?" Exthera thought for a moment. Curious. That was the first thing I noticed. Most species are afraid when they meet us. We are big, we have weapons, we represent unknown power, but humans asked questions. Lots of questions. How did our ships work? Where did we come from? Was life like on other worlds? Picked up his bottle, but did not drink? Captain Parker was especially interested in our history. She wanted to know about every war we had fought, every peace we had made. She took notes on a small computer, asked about battle tactics and diplomatic methods. I thought she was just being polite. Jake smiled. Sounds like Lisa. She was always trying to learn new things. Used to say that knowledge was the best weapon against fear. Knowledge as a weapon, Zexthera repeated. Your captain understood something that took me much longer to learn, but I am getting ahead of myself. The talks went well for 3 days. We discussed trade agreements, cultural exchanges, membership in the Galactic Council. Your people seemed eager to join the larger community. The cantina was completely quiet now. Even the bartender had stopped moving. Then the Screeth came, Zexthera said, and his voice turned cold. Several aliens in the room made disgusted sounds. The Screeth were known and hated throughout the galaxy. Jake looked confused. Who are the Screeth? Want a Screeth? He asked. A blue trader answered before Zexthera could speak. Pirates. Slavers. The worst scum in known space. They attack weak colonies, steal everything valuable, and take the people to sell in their slave markets. Zexthera nodded. Has been a plague on the galaxy for 500 years. They have ships, weapons, and no conscience at all. They heard about the new human colonies and decided you would make good slaves. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. I was on the observation deck of my ship when they arrived. 300 vessels dropped out of hyperspace all at once. Battleships, cruisers, fighters, troop transports. The largest Screeth fleet I had ever seen. Jake's face went pale. 300 ships? We only had 14. 14 ships against 300, Zexthera agreed. The Screeth flagship was a monster called the Bone Crusher, as big as a small moon, covered in weapons that could turn a planet to glass. Its commander was Warlord Grakthul, one of the most feared pirates in the galaxy. The old warrior moved his arms again, showing the size and shape of the enemy fleet. They did not even try to talk first. The Bone Crusher opened a channel to New Haven and delivered their demand. All human colonies in the sector must surrender immediately. All humans would become property of the Screeth Empire. Any resistance would result in the complete destruction of every human world. What did Captain Parker say? Asked the green alien. Zex the rest metal eye flickered. She said no. It's just like that. Very calm and polite. Thank you for the offer, but we must decline. Like someone had asked her to dinner and she already had other plans. Jake laughed despite the serious mood. That sounds like Lisa. She never got excited about anything. Could have been facing the end of the world and she would still say please and thank you. The Screeth did not expect that answer, Zexthera continued. Most species beg or try to negotiate when faced with impossible odds. Some fight. But they usually scream and make threats first. Humans just said no and started preparing for battle. He walked back to his table and sat down heavily. Admiral, Morrison ordered his little fleet into defensive positions around the planet. 12 frigates and 2 destroyers against the largest pirate army in the galaxy. I watched from my ship and felt sorry for your brave, doomed people. The cantina was so quiet that the hum of the air recyclers seemed loud. Everyone was thinking. About 14 small ships facing 300 enemy vessels. Warlord Grakthul was angry, Zexthera said. The Screeth do not like being told no. He ordered his fleet to attack the civilian cities first, to show the humans what would happen if they continued to resist. Jake's hands were tight around his drink. The orbital bombardment. I remember the alarms, people running for the shelters. 50 Scraith cruisers opened fire on your population centers, Zexthera said quietly. Plasma cannons, fusion bombs, kinetic strikes, enough firepower to level a dozen cities. But something strange happened. The attacks were not as effective as they should have been. He looked directly at Jake. Your people had been preparing for this moment, had they not? While Captain Parker was asking polite questions about our wars and weapons, your engineers were working. Your military was planning, your civilians were getting ready. Jake nodded slowly. The defense grid. We started building it the day after first contact. Underground shelters, shield generators, point defense systems. Lisa said we should hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. 3 days, Zexthara said, holding up 3 fingers. In 3 days, your people had built planetary defenses that took most worlds years to construct. Hidden weapon platforms that popped up from farm fields. Shield generators disguised as grain silos. Fighter hangars built into shopping centers. The old warrior shook his head in amazement. But that was just the beginning. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about warfare. Admiral Morrison did not try to defend your planet the way any sane military commander would. Instead, he ordered his tiny fleet to attack. Attack. The Blue Trader sounded shocked. 14 ships against 300. Not just attack, Zexthera said. They charged straight into the middle of the Screeth formation. No fancy tactics, no careful planning. Just full speed ahead, into the teeth of the enemy fleet. Jake was smiling now, but it was a sad smile. Ben Hayes was commanding the Liberty. Always said the best defense was a good offense. Commander Ben Hayes, Zexthera repeated. Him ram his destroyer directly into the Bone Crusher's weapon arrays. Should have been suicide. The Liberty was tiny compared to the enemy flagship. But just before impact, something incredible happened. He paused and took a long drink. The Liberty's crew teleported out at the last second. All of them gone in flashes of light. The ship hit the Bone Crusher at full speed, with nobody aboard. It was not a suicide attack. It was a guided missile with a human crew that refused to die. The cantina erupted in surprised voices. This was not how space battles were supposed to work. Ships had crews. Crews stayed with their ships. That was the way of war throughout the galaxy. But how? Asked the green alien. Where did they teleport to? Jake answered. Emergency pods scattered throughout the system we had been launching. Them for 3 days. Tiny things that looked like space junk. Each one had life support for a dozen people and a short-range teleporter. If a ship got in trouble, the crew could jump to safety and keep fighting from the pods. Zexthera nodded. Your people had turned the entire star system into a weapon. Every asteroid, every piece of space debris, every abandoned satellite had been modified. The Screeth thought they were fighting 14 ships. They were actually fighting against an entire solar system that had been weaponized in 3 days. He stood up again, his metal parts worry. Lieutenant Amy Foster coordinated attacks using cargo ships loaded with mining explosives. Engineer Danny Rodriguez had turned the asteroid mining platforms into long-range cannons. Even civilians were fighting. Schoolteacher Carol James led a squadron of armed shuttles flown by volunteers. The room was completely silent now. Everyone was trying to imagine a battle where an entire star system fought back. The Screeth had superior numbers and firepower, Zexthera continued. But your people had something they had never faced before. Every human in the system was thinking like a weapon. They looked at a medical scanner and saw a way to jam enemy communications. They looked at a farming robot and saw a remote-controlled bomb. They looked at a children's playground and saw materials for armor and ammunition. Jake finished his drink and set the glass down carefully. We did what we had to do. Zexthera refilled his glass and stared into the glowing liquid. The cantina remained silent, waiting for him to continue his story. Jake Collins had moved closer, sitting at a nearby table with his own drink forgotten after Commander Hayes. Rammed the Liberty into the Bone Crusher. I thought the battle would end quickly, Zexthera said. The humans had made a brave gesture, but suicide attacks rarely win wars. The Screeth still had nearly 300 ships. Your people had 13 left. He took a sip and continued.
Ow.
But something was wrong with the Screeth formation.
Ow.
We're exploding for no reason I could see. The communications were full of confusion and panic. Warlord Grakthal was screaming orders that made no sense. Jake smiled slightly. That would be the virus. Our computer expert, a teenager named Kevin Walsh, had been working on it since the first day. Every time the Screeth tried to scan our defenses, he sent a little present back through their sensors. A computer virus delivered through sensor scans, Zexthera repeated slowly. In all my years of warfare, I had never seen such a thing. Your people had weaponized curiosity itself. The more the Screeth tried to learn about you, the more damage they took. The old warrior gestured with his upper arms. But that was just the beginning. Lieutenant Amy Foster had loaded 6 cargo haulers with mining explosives. Big ships, slow and clumsy, but packed with enough firepower to crack an asteroid. Sane Commander would have sent them in formation, tried to protect them with escort fighters. He shook his head in amazement. Foster sent them in alone, each one taking a different route through the Screeth fleet. They moved like they were just trying to escape, running scared. But they were not trying to escape, guessed the blue trader from across the room. No, Zexthera confirmed. Each cargo ship had a volunteer crew of 3 people. When the Screeth moved to capture them, the humans would wait until the last possible moment, then detonate their entire cargo hold. 6 ships became 6 massive bombs, each one taking out dozens of enemy vessels. Jake's expression grew sad. Amy died in the 3rd explosion. She stayed aboard to make sure the timing was perfect. Took out a whole squadron of Screeth fighters with her. The cantina was quiet for a moment, honoring the memory of brave souls. Then Zexthera continued. Engineer Danny Rodriguez had been the busiest of all. He controlled the asteroid mining platforms in the outer system. Huge machines designed to crack rocks and extract metals, but Rodriguez had been modifying them for 3 days. The old warrior stood and walked to the center of the room again. Imagine a cannon the size of a city block. Imagine it firing chunks of metal, accelerated to nearly light speed. That is what your mining platforms became. Rodriguez turned them into the longest strange artillery in the galaxy. The Screeth never saw it coming, Jake added. Those platforms looked like normal industrial equipment on their sensors. Just boring mining gear. Nothing worth worrying about. Then suddenly, rocks were flying through space fast enough to punch holes in battleships. Zexthera nodded. Rodriguez was coordinating 17 different platforms, each one firing continuously. But here's the clever part. He was not just shooting rocks. Some projectiles were loaded with your medical supplies. Medical supplies? The green alien looked confused. Jake answered. Pure medical oxygen in pressurized containers. When they hit a ship and the containers broke, they created perfect conditions for fires. Screeth ships use a lot of flammable materials. One oxygen canister could turn a small hull breach into a raging inferno. Other projectiles contained your communication equipment, Zexthera continued. Transmitters that would stick to enemy hulls and broadcast jamming signals. Some had your food preservatives, chemicals that would eat through Screeth armor plating. Everything your people had was turned into ammunition. The old warrior returned to his seat. But the most incredible sight was the civilian volunteers. I watched through my ship's telescopes as ordinary people launched their own attacks. Carol James led a group of teachers and parents in school shuttles that had been armed with construction tools. Construction tools? Asked the bartender. Welding torches became cutting beams, Jake explained. Mac hammers became hole breakers. Even the paint sprayers were loaded with acid instead of paint. 20 shuttles flown by people who had never been in combat, taking on Screeth fighter squadrons and winning. Zexthera's metal, I glowed brighter. I watched Carol James use a school bus to ram a Screeth interceptor. A school bus armed with nothing but determination and a teacher who refused to let pirates threaten her students. She survived, by the way. The interceptor did not. He took another drink. Dr. Helen Carter was coordinating the hospital's contribution to the battle.
Damn.
She had turned every piece of medical equipment into a weapon. Surgical lasers became precision. Cutting tools for disabling enemy systems. X-ray machines became radiation weapons. Even the ambulances were being used as armed shuttles. The ambulances were my idea, Jake said quietly. They had the best shields and life support systems on the colony. Perfect for rescue missions in the middle of a space battle. Rescue missions, Zexthera repeated. That was another thing that amazed me. Most species abandon damaged ships and wounded crews during combat, too dangerous to help. But your people were constantly running rescue operations while still fighting the battle. The old warrior moved his lower arms, showing the complexity of the human tactics. Every time a Screeth ship was disabled, human rescue teams would board it. Not to loot or capture, but to save any crew members who wanted to surrender. They turned the Screeth's own brutality against them. Jake nodded. A lot of Screeth soldiers were tired of the pirate life. When they saw humans offering medical help instead of torture, many of them switched sides right in the middle of the battle. Within 4 hours, the Screeth were not just fighting your ships, Zexthera said. They were fighting their own people, who had decided they would rather serve under human protection than die for Warlord Grakthal. He paused to let that sink in. But the most terrifying thing I witnessed was what happened to the farming equipment. Pete Williams had been a crop farmer before the battle. He controlled automated harvesters, seed planters, and irrigation systems across the entire continent. Farming equipment does not sound very dangerous, commented the blue trader. Zexthera laughed grimly. That is what the Screeth thought, till Williams turned crop dusters into atmospheric fighters. Harvesting machines became mobile weapons. Platforms, irrigation pumps started spraying industrial acid instead of water. Even the automated scarecrows were modified to carry explosives. Jake smiled at the memory. Pete always said farming was just another kind of warfare. You fight weeds, insects, bad weather, plant diseases. Fighting pirates was not much different. Screeth tried to land ground troops, Zexthera continued. They thought they could bypass your space defenses and capture the planet through direct assault. 5,000 warriors in drop pods, armed with the best weapons money could buy. The old warrior's expression grew serious. They landed in Williams' farming district. What happened next will give me nightmares for the rest of my life. The humans had turned the entire landscape into a trap. Automated farm equipment attacked from every direction. Crop fields became minefields. Grain silos were actually missile launchers in disguise. The children helped too, Jake added. Kevin Walsh's computer class had been working on defensive programs for 3 days. Every electronic device on the planet was connected to their network. Streetlights became targeting systems. Vending machines became ammunition dispensers. Even video game consoles were being used to coordinate drone attacks. Zexthera shook his head slowly. I watched 12-year-old humans use their homework computers to hack Screeth battle armor. They turned the enemy's own equipment against them. Warriors found their weapons firing at their own comrades. Their communication systems started playing human music instead of tactical updates. The cantina was completely silent now. Everyone was trying to imagine children turning toys and school supplies into instruments of war. By the 5th hour, Warlord Grakthal was screaming for retreat, Zexthera said. His mighty fleet was being destroyed by farming equipment and school children. But your people were not finished with him yet. The old warrior finished his drink and set the glass down with a sharp click. Captain Parker had been quiet during most of the battle, coordinating from the planetary command center. When the Screeth tried to retreat, she opened a communication channel to every ship in the system. Jake's voice was soft. I remember her speech. She said the Screeth were welcome to leave, but they had to return everything they had stolen from other colonies first. Every slave, every piece of treasure, every ship they had captured over the years. Grakthal laughed at her, Zexthera said. He called her a fool and said no human had the power to make such demands. That was when Captain Parker showed him what your people had been building while he was losing the battle. The old warrior stood up one more time, his voice filled with wonder and fear. She activated something called the gravity web. Your scientists had been placing devices throughout the solar system for 3 days. Tiny machines that could create artificial gravity fields. Zexthera poured himself another drink, his 4 hands moving slowly as the weight of his memories settled on him. The cantina remained perfectly quiet. Even Jake Collins was leaning forward now, waiting to hear the rest of the story.
After me.
Gravity web trapped the Screeth fleet. I thought the battle was over, Zexthera said. Warlord Grakthel had lost more than half his ships. His remaining forces were surrounded and could not escape. Any reasonable commander would have surrendered. He took a sip and continued. But Grakthel was not reasonable. He was angry, humiliated, and desperate. He decided that if he could not win, he would make sure the humans paid the highest possible price for their victory. Jake's face grew serious. The final assault. I remembered the alarms going off again. Grakthel ordered his remaining ships to ram your planet, Zexthera explained to the listening crowd. 120 vessels, all diving toward New Haven at maximum speed. Their engines were overloaded, their weapons firing constantly. It was a suicide attack designed to crack your world like an egg. The blue trader made a shocked sound. Ramming an entire planet? That would kill everyone, including his own people? The Screeth do not care about their own soldiers, Zexthera said grimly. Grakthal thought he could still win by destroying everything. If he could not have human slaves, then there would be no humans left alive to defy him. The old warrior stood and walked to the window. Outside, stars twinkled in the darkness of space. I watched those ships diving toward your world and felt sick. No planetary defense could stop that many vessels moving that fast. Your people had fought brilliantly, but physics is physics. That much mass hitting a planet would shatter it. Jake smiled sadly. That was when Lisa Parker made her final decision. She had been holding back our most dangerous weapon, hoping she would not need to use it. What weapon? Asked the green alien. What could possibly stop 100 ramming ships? Zexthera turned back to face the room. That was exactly what I wanted to know. I was watching through every sensor my ship had, trying to understand what the humans could do. Your planetary defenses were already damaged. Your fleet was scattered. Across the system, you had no super weapons, no secret battle stations. He paused, his metal eye glowing brighter. Then Captain Parker opened a communication channel to every human in the star system. Not just the military, not just the government officials, every single person on New Haven and the other colonies. Jake nodded. I was in an emergency shelter when her message came through. She said it was time for the final phase. She said every human needed to make a choice. What choice? The bartender had stopped cleaning glasses completely now. Whether to trust each other completely, Jake answered. Lisa explained that we had one way to stop the ramming attack, but it required every person in the system to work together. Not just cooperation, but total unity. If even one person refused to help, the plan would fail and everyone would die. Zexthera walked back to his table, moving slowly. I monitored your communication networks during those final minutes. I heard changed everything I thought I knew about intelligent species. He sat down heavily. 2 million humans, all talking at once. But they were not panicking, or arguing, or blaming each other. They were organizing. In less than 10 minutes, your entire population had formed into one giant coordinated team. The network, Jake said simply. Every computer, every communication device, every electronic system on all our worlds. Kevin Walsh and his programming team had been preparing for this moment. They connected everything into one massive thinking system. Zexthera's voice grew quiet. I have seen species with telepathic links. I have fought against hive minds that could coordinate millions of individuals. But what you humans did was different. You chose to think as one. The cantina was so silent that the hum of the air systems seemed loud. Everyone was trying to understand what they were hearing. Every human brain became part of a giant computer, Zexthera continued. Farmers shared their knowledge of soil and weather with engineers who were calculating orbital mechanics. Children playing video games provided targeting data for weapons they had never seen. Doctors studying anatomy helped mathematicians understand the weak points in Screeth ship designs. Jake leaned back in his chair. It was the strangest feeling. I could sense what everyone else was thinking, but I was still myself. Like being part of a huge family where everyone shared the same thoughts. The ramming ships were 3 minutes from impact when your people activated their final weapon, Zexthera said. But it was not a machine or a bomb or an energy beam. It was mathematics. Several aliens in the room looked confused. Mathematics was not normally considered a weapon. Every human in the system started calculating at the same time, the old warrior explained. They analyzed the trajectory of every Screth ship, the rotation of your planet, the gravitational effects of your moons and asteroids. 2 million minds working together on the same problem. He gestured with all four arms. Then they started making tiny adjustments to everything in the solar system. Mining platforms fired small rockets to change their positions. Satellites adjusted their orbits by fractions of degrees. Even your planet's rotation was altered slightly by synchronized explosions in the deep mines. Jake smiled at the memory. It took us 90 seconds to turn the entire star system into a precision instrument. Every piece of matter, every gravitational field, every magnetic current was adjusted to create exactly the right conditions. Conditions for what? Asked. The blue trader, sure, answered. A trap that used the Screeth's own momentum against them. As the ramming ships approached New Haven, they found themselves flying through a maze of carefully positioned obstacles. Asteroids that had been moved into their paths, gravity fields that pulled them off course, magnetic storms that disrupted their navigation. The old warrior's voice filled with awe. But the most incredible part was the precision. Your people did not just scatter the enemy ships randomly. They guided each vessel to a specific location where it would be captured safely. Captured? The green alien sounded shocked. You captured ships that were trying to ram your planet? Jake nodded. Used the planet's magnetic field and some creative gravity manipulation? The Screeth ships found themselves caught in what was basically a giant invisible net. They could not crash into New Haven, but they also could not escape. Zexthera shook his head in amazement. 120 vessels, each one weighing millions of tons, all moving at incredible speed. Your people caught them like a fisherman, catching minnows in a net. Took a long drink before continuing. That was when I truly understood what humans were. Other species build weapons to fight their enemies. You turn yourselves into weapons? Every human brain, every human hand, every human heart becomes part of a machine designed for victory. The cantina was completely quiet now. Everyone was trying to imagine an entire species working together as one giant weapon. After the battle, Galactic Council investigators came to study what had happened, Zexthera said. They wanted to understand how such a small colony had defeated the largest pirate fleet in the galaxy. They expected to find secret technologies or hidden military bases. Jake laughed quietly. I remember those investigators. They kept asking about our super weapons and advanced battle computers. They could not believe we had one using farm equipment and school supplies. The investigators interviewed thousands of humans, Zexthera continued. They studied every piece of equipment you had used, every tactic you had employed. Do you know what they found? He looked around the room at all the listening faces. They found that humans do not need weapons because you are weapons. Every person, every tool, every idea becomes part of your war machine when survival is at stake. The old warrior finished his drink and set the glass down. Dr. Helen Carter explained it to the investigators. She said humans look at a medical scanner and see a communication jammer. You look at a farming robot and see a mobile weapons platform. You look at a child's toy and see the components for an electronic warfare system. It's not that we want to fight, Jake added quietly. Is that we refuse to lose. When someone threatens our families, our homes, our way of life, we will turn anything and everything into a tool for protection. Zexthera nodded slowly. Captain Parker told the council investigators something that still gives me nightmares. She said humans had been holding back during the entire battle. He did not want to frighten the other species too much during first contact. The room erupted in surprised voices. Holding back after everything they had just heard? Jake smiled and raised his glass. Lisa always said it was better to be underestimated than to scare your friends away. We showed the Screeth just enough to convince them to leave us alone. But we kept our really creative ideas in reserve. Zexara stared at the human with all four eyes. Really creative ideas? What could possibly be more creative than turning an entire star system into a weapon? Jake's smile grew wider. Well, for example, we never showed anyone what happens when we get really serious about mathematics, or what we can do with music, or how dangerous we become when we start telling jokes while fighting. The old warrior reached for another bottle with shaking hands. Jokes? You weaponize humor? Zexthera stared at Jake Collins for a long moment, then slowly pushed his empty bottle away. The old warrior looked tired, as if telling the story had drained him of energy. Around the cantina, aliens whispered to each other in dozens of different languages. You want to know what happened after the battle? Zexthera asked. How the galaxy changed when word spread about what humans could do. Jake nodded, genuinely curious. We heard rumors, but New Haven was pretty isolated for the first few months after the fight. The Council kept us under protective observation. Observation, Zexthora repeated with a bitter laugh. That is what they called it. But I was there for the emergency council sessions. I heard the real discussions. They were not protecting you from the galaxy. They were protecting the galaxy from you. The blue trader leaned forward. What do you mean? Zexthora stood up and walked to the center of the room again. Within a week of the battle, every major power in the galaxy had received detailed reports about the human victory. Military leaders across 1,000 worlds were trying to understand how 14 ships had destroyed the largest pirate fleet in known space. He gestured with his upper arms. The Regalian Empire immediately canceled their expansion plans into human space. The Crystal Collective withdrew all their ships from the border regions. Even the proud Klingari warrior philosophers declared humans to be worthy of respect and fear. Jake looked surprised. The Klingari. I heard they fight anyone who will give them a good battle. They do, confirmed the green alien from across the room. The Klingari live for glorious combat, but they also understand the difference between bravery and suicide. Fighting humans would be suicide. Ixthera nodded. Admiral Korath of the Klingari sent a message to the Council 3 days after receiving our battle reports. He said his people would consider it an honor to fight alongside humans, but would never again fight against them. The old warrior returned to his table and sat down. But the real changes started when the Skreath Empire collapsed completely. Collapsed, Jake asked. We knew they retreated, but we thought they just went back to their home worlds. Grakthul made it back to Skreath space with 47 ships, Zexthara explained, out of 300. When he tried to explain what had happened, the other Skreath warlords thought he was lying or insane. The bartender set a fresh bottle. In front of Zexthura, what did they think really happened? They thought Grakthel had been defeated by a secret council superweapon, the old warrior answered. The idea that a single human colony could destroy their greatest fleet was impossible for them to accept. So they decided Grakthel was either a coward or a traitor. Jake winced. That could not have ended well for him. The Skreath Civil War lasted 8 months, Zexthera continued. Different warlords fighting each other, each one claiming to be the rightful leader. Their empire tore itself apart from the inside. Billions of slaves were freed when their masters were too busy fighting each other to maintain control. But you took a sip from his new bottle. But here is the truly amazing part. Word spread among the slave populations about what humans had done. Stories about the species that refused to surrender, that could turn anything into a weapon. Slave revolts started breaking out across Skreath space. Revolts? Inspired by us? Jake sounded both proud and worried. Inspired by your example, Zexthera confirmed. Slaves who had been broken and hopeless suddenly remembered how to fight. They used the same tactics you had demonstrated. Medical equipment became weapons. Farming tools became instruments of war. Even cooking utensils were turned into military assets. The green alien shook her head in amazement. The humans taught the galaxy how to weaponize everyday life. Within 6 months, there were no more Skreath slave worlds, Zexthera said. The empire that had terrorized the galaxy for 500 years was gone, not because of military conquest, but because their victims had learned to think like humans. Jake was quiet for a moment. I never thought about that. You were just trying to protect our families. And in protecting your families, you accidentally started a revolution that freed half the galaxy, Zexthera replied. But that was only the beginning of the changes. The old warrior gestured toward the cantina's windows, where stars sparkled in the darkness. Trade routes started avoiding human space, not because you were hostile, but because merchants were afraid of what you might do if they accidentally offended you. That seems unfair, Jake protested. "We've never attacked peaceful traders." "Fear is not always rational," explained the blue trader. "My own company's insurance rates tripled for any cargo shipments through human territory. Not because humans are violent, because our insurers could not calculate the risk of dealing with a species that could weaponize anything." Zexthera nodded. The Galactic Insurance Guild spent 3 months trying to write policies for human space. How do you insure cargo when the destination species can turn a simple delivery into a potential weapon? They finally gave up and just marked all human worlds as incalculable risk. Jake looked frustrated. "We just want to trade and learn about other cultures. We're not trying to scare anyone." "I know," Zexthera said gently. "But consider it from our perspective. You defeated the Screeth using school supplies and farming equipment. What good? You do with military-grade technology? What about industrial equipment? What about our own trading ships and their cargoes?" The old warrior leaned forward. 6 months after New Haven, the Council received a report from the Centauri Trade Federation. A human merchant had visited one of their stations to buy simple electronics. It's just computers and communication equipment for a new colony. "That sounds normal," commented the bartender. "The human spent 3 hours asking questions about how the equipment worked," Zexthera continued. "Innocent questions about power requirements, signal strength, component materials. The kind of questions any curious buyer might ask." Jake was starting to look uncomfortable. What happened? The station engineers realized afterward that the human had asked exactly the right questions to learn how to turn their entire communication network into a planet-wide jamming system.
Extra
Answered. Not only that, but the human could have used the same information to weaponize every piece of electronics on the station. The cantina fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. "The human never made any threats," Zexthera continued. "I never showed any hostile intent. He was polite, friendly, and paid full price for everything he bought. But in 3 hours of casual conversation, he had learned enough to potentially cripple their entire world." Jake sighed. "That sounds like something we would do accidentally. We'd like to understand how things work." "That is exactly the problem," Zexthera said. "Human curiosity is a weapon all by itself. You ask innocent questions, and suddenly everyone around you realizes they have given you the keys to their destruction." The blue trader spoke up. "My cousin works for the Regulan Defense Ministry. He says they have a new policy about human visitors. No human is allowed to see more than one type of technology during a single visit. The Vortanian Empire has banned humans from their research facilities completely," added the green alien. "They are afraid that humans will learn their secrets and find ways to use them that the Vortanians never considered." Zexthera picked up his bottle and studied the glowing liquid inside. "But the strangest changes happened in our military academies. Every major space force now has mandatory courses on human tactical thinking. They teach classes about us," Jake asked. "They try to," Zexthera answered. "But it is impossible to teach what you humans do naturally. Military cadets spend years learning conventional tactics, proper use of weapons, standard battle formations. Then they study human methods and realize that everything they learned is useless." The old warrior shook his head. "How do you teach students to think like humans? How do you explain that a medical scanner can be a weapon, that farming equipment can defeat a space fleet, that children playing games can hack enemy battle computers?" "You cannot teach creativity," Jake said quietly. "You can only encourage it." "Exactly," Zexthera agreed. "And that is what terrifies military leaders across the galaxy. Human tactical thinking cannot be copied or learned, can only be experienced. You either think like a human, or you do not." He raised his bottle toward Jake. The Council finally gave up trying to understand human capabilities. Instead, they declared humanity a protected species under special circumstances. "What kind of special circumstances?" "Protection from humans, not for humans," Zexthera answered. "The Council decided that any species that could accidentally revolutionize warfare while defending a farming colony needed to be handled very carefully." Jake laughed despite himself. "So you are protecting the galaxy from us?" "In a way, yes," Zexthera confirmed. "All human colonies are now under Council oversight. not to restrict you, but to make sure the rest of us know what you were doing before. You accidentally changed the nature of reality again. The old warrior finished his drink and set the bottle down with finality. Trade agreements with humans now include specific clauses about creative applications of purchased goods.